The general features of orthodox hostilities, that is, the war of position and the war of movement, differ fundamentally from guerrilla warfare. There are other readily apparent differences, such as those in organization, armament, equipment supply, tactics, command, and conception of the terms front and rear in the matter of military responsibilities. When considered from the point of view of total numbers, guerrilla units are many. As individual combat units, they may vary in size from the smallest, of several score or several hundred men, to the battalion or the regiment of several thousand. This is not the case in regular organized units. A primary feature of guerrilla operations is their dependence upon the people themselves to organize battalions and other units. As a result of this, organization depends largely upon local circumstances. In the case of guerrilla groups, the standard of equipment is of low order, and they must depend for their sustenance primarily upon what the locality affords. The strategy of guerrilla warfare is manifestly unlike that employed in orthodox operations. As the basic tactic of the former is constant activity and movement, there is guerrilla warfare no such thing as a decisive battle. There is nothing comparable to the fixed, passive defense that characterizes orthodox war. In guerrilla warfare, the transformation of a moving situation into a positional defensive situation never arises. The general features of reconnaissance, partial deployment, general deployment, and development of the attack that are used in mobile warfare are not common in guerrilla warfare. There are differences also in the matter of leadership and command. In guerrilla warfare, small units act independently, play the principal role, and there must be no excessive interference with their activities. In orthodox warfare, particularly in a moving situation, a certain degree of initiative is accorded subordinates, but in principle, command is centralized. This is done because all units and all supporting aims and arms in all districts must coordinate to the highest degree. In the case of guerrilla warfare, this is not only undesirable, but impossible. Only adjacent guerrilla units can coordinate their activities to any degree. Strategically, their activities can be roughly correlated with those of the regular forces, and tactically, they must cooperate with the adjacent units of the regular army. But there are no structures on the extent of the guerrilla activity, nor is it primarily characterized by the quality of cooperation of many units. When we discuss the terms front and rear, it must be remembered that while guerrillas do have bases, their primary field of activity is in the enemy's rear areas. They themselves have no rear. Because an orthodox army has rear installations, except in some special cases, as during the 10,000-mile-long March of the Red Army, or as in the case of certain units operating in the Shanxi province, it cannot operate as guerrillas can. As to the matter of military responsibilities, those of the guerrillas are to exterminate small forces of the enemy, to harass and weaken large forces, to attack enemy lines and communications, to establish bases capable of supporting independent operations in the enemy's rear, to force the enemy to disperse his strength, and to coordinate all these activities with those of the regular army on distant battlefronts. From the foregoing summary of differences that exist between guerrilla warfare and orthodox warfare, it can be seen that it is improper to compare the two. Further distinction must be made in order to clarify this matter. While the 8th Route Army is a regular army, its North China campaign is essentially guerrilla in nature, for it operates in the enemy's rear. On occasion, however, 8th Route Army commanders have concentrated powerful forces to strike an enemy in motion, and the characteristics of orthodox mobile warfare were evident in the Battle of Ping Sing Quan and in other engagements. On the other hand, after the fall of Fingling Tu, the operations of Central Shanxi and Suian troops were more guerrilla than orthodox in nature. In this connection, the precise character of Generalissimo Chiang's instruction to the effect that independent brigades would carry out guerrilla operations should be recalled. In spite of such temporary activities, those orthodox units retained their identity, and after the fall of Fingling Tu, they were not only able to fight along orthodox lines, but often found it necessary to do so. This is an example of the fact that orthodox armies may, due to the changes in the situation, temporarily function as guerrillas. Likewise, guerrilla units formed from the people may gradually develop into regular units. and, when operating as such, employ the tactics of orthodox mobile warfare. While these units function as guerrillas, they may be compared to innumerable gnats, which, by biting a giant both in front and rear, ultimately exhaust him. They make themselves as unendurable as a group of cruel and hateful devils, and as they grow and attain gigantic proportions, they will find that their victim is not only exhausted, but practically perishing. It is for this very reason that our guerrilla activities are a source of constant mental worry to Imperial Japan. Well, it is improper to confuse orthodox with guerrilla operations. It is equally improper to consider that there is a chasm between the two. While differences do exist, similarities appear under certain conditions, and this fact must be appreciated if we wish to establish clearly the relationship between the two. If we consider both types of warfare as a single subject, or if we confuse guerrilla warfare with the mobile operations of orthodox war, we fall into this error. We exaggerate the function of guerrillas and minimize that of the regular armies. If we agree with Shang Su-ha, who says, "Guerrilla warfare is the primary war strategy of a people seeking to emancipate itself," or with Cao Kang, who believes that guerrilla strategy is the only strategy possible for oppressed people, we are exaggerating the importance of guerrilla hostilities. What those zealous friends I have just quoted do not realize is this: if we do not fit guerrilla operations into their proper niche, we cannot promote them realistically. Then, not only would those who oppose take advantage of our varying opinions to turn them to their own uses to undermine us, but guerrillas who would be led to assume responsibilities they could not successfully discharge, and that should probably be carried out by orthodox force. In the meantime, the important guerrilla function of coordinating activities with the regular forces would be neglected. Furthermore, if the theory that guerrilla warfare is our only strategy were actually applied, the regular forces would be weakened. We would be divided in purpose, and guerrilla hostilities would decline. If we say, "Let us transform the regular forces into guerrillas, and do not place our first reliance on a victory to be gained by the regular armies over the enemy," we may certainly expect to see as a result the failure of the anti-Japanese war of resistance. The concept that guerrilla warfare is an end in itself and that guerrilla activities can be divorced from those of the regular forces is incorrect. We assume that guerrilla warfare does not regress from beginning to end beyond its elementary forms. We have failed to recognize the fact that guerrilla hostilities can, under specific conditions, develop and assume orthodox characteristics. An opinion that admits the existence of guerrilla war but isolates it is one that does not properly estimate the potentialities of such war. Equally dangerous is the concept that condemns guerrilla war on the ground that war has no other aspects than the purely orthodox. This opinion is often expressed by those who have seen the corrupt phenomenon of some guerrilla regiments, observed their lack of discipline, and have seen them used as a screen behind which certain persons have indulged in bribery and other corrupt practices. This people will not admit the fundamental necessity for guerrilla bands that spring from the armed people. They say, only the regular forces are capable of conducting guerrilla operations. This theory is a mistaken one, and would lead to the abolition of the people's guerrilla war. A proper conception of the relationship that exists between the guerrilla effort and that of the regular forces is essential. We believe it can be stated this way: guerrilla operations during the anti-Japanese war may for a certain time and temporarily become its paramount feature, particularly insofar as the enemy's rear is concerned. However, if we view the war as a whole, there can be no doubt that our regular forces are of primary importance, because it is they who are alone capable of producing the decision. Guerrilla warfare assists them in producing this favorable decision. Orthodox forces may, under certain circumstances, operate as guerrillas, and the latter may, under certain conditions, develop to the status of the former. However, both guerrilla forces and regular forces have their own respective development and their proper combinations. To clarify the relationship between the mobile aspect of orthodox war and guerrilla war, we may say that general agreement exists that the principal element of our strategy must be mobility. With the war of movement, we may at times combine the war of position. Both of these are assisted by general guerrilla hostilities. It is true that on the battlefield, mobile war often becomes positional. It is true that this situation may be reversed. It is equally true that each form may combine with the other.